How many of you agree with me the world is really quickly changing? Everybody agree with me? Yes. Well, first introduced to me by a past fellow Rotarian, Dave Ditmars, as a fellow Hungarian whom I should know, I quickly recognized a true and future genius. A speaker of 4 languages, a holder of BSE in electronic engineering, computer science, e-commerce, and video broadcasting over IP, Aram Kovach is a consummate entrepreneur. He's president and CEO of his company, Mobius International, and CEO of Compex, an e-commerce and web firm, and founder and president of Donate and Help Me, a charity. And he also holds several patents, to include a method for tracking and processing passengers and their transported articles, and a system utilizing camera-equipped cellular telephones and counterfeit authentication, and a wet garment detector. It's good for diapers if your kid's asleep. And a system for utilizing camera-equipped cellular telephones, and international promotion gaming and method, and there's a few more. Most of you agree that the world is changing fast. Mr. Kovach is one of those making it happen. Today we'll talk to you about a new currency everybody's talking about. Please welcome Aram Kovach to Columbus Rotary. Ishan Hozat.
Hugo, thanks. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here today with you all, and I'm actually looking forward to taking what time I have left here to take you on a fast-paced journey through the world of Bitcoin. I actually have my son Sebastian here to thank for introducing me to this interesting and ever-changing world of Bitcoin, and I kind of became intrigued over time to the degree that I'm now actually actively seeking and researching and looking at different business opportunities in this space. I think it's going to be one of those technologies that's going to revolutionize the world, and it actually already has. But more interestingly, I think it's going to change the way we live, we work, and play. And so I have prepared a quick presentation. I'm going to try to get through the slides as quickly as I can and answer any questions at the end if you guys have questions, and I'm sure you will. This is going to be a little bit of a mind-expanding experience for most of you because you probably heard about Bitcoin, but maybe are interested in it or have questions about how it works and what it does. So I'm going to do a brief compare and contrast to the world that we live in today, and I guess the perspective of the world from the way I see it. So I'm going to walk over here and grab the wireless mic and jump into this presentation if I could. Okay. That works. It's a little loud, but maybe we can turn it down. So let me jump into this presentation that I have prepared. Not a good thing. Hold on. He's working on it. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much. Maybe that works better. All right, let me switch this projector so I can show you the stuff that we've got prepared. So, let's start there. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about money and what we think of money and currency and maybe compare and contrast the two. So, in a quick overview, I guess what I'm going to try to do is do a presentation. But I'm looking at my notes. Bear with me. Okay, so as you know, we all kind of carry a dollar bill around with us everywhere we go, but if you really want to look at how the future is going to evolve, you want to see or actually take a look at the past, and there's a very good indication of what happened in the past is going to repeat itself. So we really have a very interesting kind of world before us that we're actually living through. So by the show of cell phones, hold on, how many of you have heard of Bitcoin? Wow, almost there. How many of you have Bitcoins? Just a few. All right, great. So it's a very interesting technology from my perspective because I think it lends itself well to a whole slew of opportunities. And I'm actually going backwards here. Bear with me. As you may know, there's a whole bunch of companies that have now started to accept Bitcoin, and they are, some of them well-known, some of them less well-known. You have things like Dish Network or Expedia recently accepted Bitcoin as a method of payment, or Dell Computers. Really, Bitcoin, if you think about it, is just an interesting way or a revolutionary way to create a transport mechanism for exchanging value between two individuals without a third-party trust validator. So typically in the world that we live in today, I would have to be trusted on a network like the Visa network, and when I come and use my credit card, I'm actually in that space providing some level of trust to know that if I give you the authorization to charge my Visa card, you're actually receiving that money. In the world of Bitcoin, that trust is actually handled through a mathematical algorithm that allows you to create an anonymous trust between multiple mining computers that actually generate the Bitcoins in such a way that that transaction is valid. So for the first time ever, the technology solved an interesting problem which created an opportunity for us to really expand what it can do in the way of exchanging information. Now, we often have something like this where we jump to conclusions because we think we have all the information in what we are actually seeing, hearing across in the news. But as you can see here, that's not always true. So I wanted to start by an interesting explanation of something that most of you do every day, which is that when you sign into a website, you probably do something like a transcription of this little code that's here on your web page. How many of you knew what this is or know what that is? Okay, great. Did you know that you're actually doing work for the man without being paid or compensated every time you do that? That's called a CAPTCHA. And what you're actually doing every time you log into a web page is you're actually translating books. You've translated unwillingly and unknowingly several million books already for everybody like Google and others that use this technology, but you are actually I think you're actually convinced that it's doing something to do with your secrecy or your privacy or your autonomy, when in fact you're actually translating books. So we're actually generating this kind of information on the fly every day. Before you even get out of bed and you turn your computer on, you're creating millions of records of information about everywhere you've been and what you've done on the internet, and that data is then sold to other companies which are using your information to make money. So we all in this room collectively are working every time we get on the internet without realizing that we're actually producing this big data that's massaged and analyzed. And your data goes to a lot of different locations, from advertising agencies to servers to analytics, to look at everything that you're actually doing so that somebody else can profit from it. And so what Bitcoin will do and is doing is it's changing this paradigm a little bit to give you actually control over some of that. And when we think of big data, it looks something like this, but in effect, the world has changed a lot since we had machines like this, where now we're creating a very interesting spy state experiment. So in Singapore, for example, there's a project underway to catalog every person, their medical records, everything they do, their salary, their spending habits, and it's all in the name of bettering society, but it's actually used as a predictor to see if they can actually figure out what you're going to do next. So does anybody remember Minority Report as a movie? Does it sound similar to that? So that's the kind of world that we're actually living in today. And even to the extent that most of you don't realize this, but there was a study done that everybody who happened to like curly fries on Facebook was determined to have a higher IQ or more intelligent than the other person that would like a straight French fry. Now, it seems like a totally weird kind of uncorrelating kind of effect, but, and by the way, eating curly fries is not going to make you more intelligent, but if you already like it, you're probably one of those few that are actually benefiting from this study. So these are the kind of social experiments that are happening on the web, And to the degree that you don't realize it, everybody who is on the internet is being looked at, analyzed, studied, willingly and unwillingly. So I find these kinds of stories fascinating because in the world of the Bitcoin, where maybe we have currency and anonymity to a degree that we like, in places like Afghanistan, you wouldn't believe it, but this is where actually Bitcoin has taken hold. And the reason being is that you really can't work as a woman in Afghanistan. You would be killed or prosecuted. And since you can actually open a Bitcoin wallet anonymously, college-age student girls are signing up to work for American companies and are being paid in Bitcoin for reporting for all kinds of American blogs and other media types. Now, Bitcoin is really, in my mind, a currency and a technology that's designed and developed for the other 6.5 billion unbankable people. We in the United States hear about it, see it, and we're all doing pretty well. We just had a nice lunch. But in places where you're killed because you can't work, and if you were to work and somebody found out, you would be stoned to death, the technology lends itself very nicely because you can open up a Bitcoin wallet anonymously without giving out any personal information. So girls in Afghanistan are working, getting paid in Bitcoin. They buy Amazon gift cards for their cousins in London, and when they come to visit them in Afghanistan, they bring gifts like, hey, I came to visit you, here's the purse that I brought to you as a gift, which is a purse she actually bought for herself, but it was paid for with Bitcoin from an anonymous source. So I find this kind of aspect of the technology fascinating because we study people on the internet, and I'm guilty as charged because we do it to a degree also. Target did, for example, a very interesting study of looking at behavior of shoppers online to figure out which one of them is pregnant. And it caused a bit of a monkey wrench. Some of you may have read about this, where a teenager was found to be pregnant and they knew about it before her parents did. So this type of behavior is maybe predatory for some of you in the way you think about the world, but nevertheless it's happening today and people are actually doing it. So in a kind of a brief history and overview of money, I just wanted to kind of touch on the differences of the repeat cycle of what things we've seen in the past and how they're coming to fruition again. We dealt in seeds and shells and coins, and those were all good things, but at one point it becomes difficult to put 1,000 shells in your pan, so we have invented different ways to kind of cope with that. But these types of bartering ideas are really not new, and even kids in school come up with interesting ways to barter, 2 Pokemon cards for a rubber band bracelet. They've never heard of money, they don't even know what that is, but they just figured out that I give you 2 of these for 1 of those. So I think it's in our very nature as human beings to barter and exchange things of value with one another. And of course, to try to get some sort of stability, because the seeds may spoil in your pans, we kind of decided to tie our value of currency to gold, which is a good standard because it's in limited supply. And this, by the way, also mirrors or mimics the algorithm used behind Bitcoin's invention, which actually very closely mimics the behavior of precious metals. It's limited in quantity, and in the year 2140, we will have created all the Bitcoins that will ever be. And I'll talk more about how they actually come to fruition in a second. But basically what we did is we went from a gold standard where we had our currency tied to gold to now just a promissory note. And I think that I find that interesting because in the history of Bitcoin, I don't know if some of you have read this, but a guy actually bought a pizza with his 10,000 Bitcoins at one point. And in today's dollars, he paid this amount for his pizza. So at the time it was worth very little, but he thought, hey, I'm just going to try it, see if somebody will take my Bitcoins and I can maybe buy a pizza for it, and he did. So historically speaking, the things that happen in the world that we live in, you have fun facts like this where we have money and credit cards and digital currency, and now we're actually advancing further into this idea that we're actually really just pushing zeros and ones. At the end of the day, everything that we have in our use becomes a 0 and a 1. So if you kind of pay attention to this whole world that we live in, you kind of realize that there's some very interesting things that happen in our banking sector. And when the Federal Reserve basically writes a check, we're just kind of creating money mostly out of thin air. But then that becomes more interesting in the way that we actually use this, because we, as people, have built this system with the Federal Reserve in place, where the Federal Reserve basically issues an IOU, which is a promissory note or a bond, which then we actually go in a circle and create a dollar when we print it, and that gets sold. And as you can see here, we turn that back around, and our government basically sells those bonds out for money to other people and other countries like China for funding social programs, development, military, wars, you name it, which then we actually go through the bank to buy and can invest in if we choose to, which becomes a kind of loan to promise to pay back for things that we want, which is a car, which then we then turn around and pay for and work hard with our sweat equity to build out into a kind of taxable income, which then of course we pay taxes on, and we increase the money supply basically in doing that. And of course we have the collection agency of the Fed, which is the IRS, that takes our money and puts it back into the system. So I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but it's kind of an interesting roundabout way of looking at how money is created, how it flows, how we use it, and what happens to it in its course of exchanging hands. For every $1 trillion or $1 billion, we generate $10 trillion that are never minted by this promissory note exchange that happens every day. And so when you look at the world from the anonymous perspective, I think I shared with you just enough examples to make you feel a little squeamish, because the anonymity is gone. And I guess in the world that we live in, Bitcoin is the kind of technology that changes not only the privacy, but the anonymity of the person or people or companies that are exchanging Bitcoin with one another. So while you lose your privacy to the extent that you're being watched, you can open a Bitcoin wallet and not provide a name. You don't have to give your identity to anyone to open up a Bitcoin wallet through which you can receive funds, for example, for a charity. And I think as things go, we see the world in a very different place from the Bitcoin universe, because Bitcoin is really the first act of the first scene of this technology, which is kind of like if you went back in the days of the internet starting out and somebody asked you, well, what is the internet? And you said, well, we can send emails. Well, great. We know today we can do a lot more on the internet than just send an email. Bitcoin is really the platform of exchanging value between two people on a network and a technology which unfortunately all carry the same name. So I was fascinated by this at first, because it looked to me like as individuals we look at new technologies and we try to squeeze the round peg in the square hole based on how we've done traditionally things in the past. But basically it's a technology that's empowering the next generation of kids to open up commerce globally, because you don't have any currency conversion. Money essentially as value, and not even money, think of it as value. I could use the Bitcoin technology to encapsulate anything of value. A bond, a stock certificate, a file, a service. And the technology is really rapidly evolving now, to the extent that there's over 30,000 developers in this space building the craziest kinds of things that you can imagine. And those things are all becoming real literally overnight, where they're even crowdsourcing new companies and new startups in such a way that you throw an idea on the table, you ask for people to commit money to it, they test it, try it, if it flies, it goes on to the next thing, and then it evolves. And so I think from a perspective of what the technology offers, it's fascinating. Some of the facts that you may have heard of, and I wanted to share with you all, is that Bitcoins are actually mined. It's a calculation that's performed on a computer chip, which used to be done on a microprocessor, but now it's too slow. And so people started building these ASIC chips to create faster and faster computational devices. And Bitcoins are actually mined into existence. There's 21 million Bitcoins that are ever going to be mined, and that's going to be reached in the year 2140. Every 10 minutes, you have a block mined, which is 25 Bitcoins generally that's mined. This technology was developed by an anonymous guy named Satoshi Nakamoto, or if you want to think of it as a group of people. He published a paper in 2008. It's 9 pages long. I encourage all of you to read it. It's a little bit of a mind-expanding experiment in itself to show you how the technology was invented, designed, and built, but it's public knowledge. Anybody who wants to can read it. Anybody who wants to can participate. You don't have to ask for permission from anyone to engage in the technology or to enhance it or improve it. And it's kind of built almost like a Unix or a Linux platform where good ideas get included, bad ideas get omitted. And if there is a problem, you have, thousands and thousands of developers working to fix the problem immediately. I think of it as kind of like a game, because each Bitcoin is also divisible by 1 million units. So you could buy 60 cents of a Bitcoin if you wanted to. You don't have to buy the whole thing. You can buy fractions of it. And as such, you can really start to engage in this technology very, very quickly. This is a view of a data center that's actually mining Bitcoin today. And those pipes that you see are actually the cooling water that's circulating the ASIC chips that cool the microprocessor that are calculating these hashtags, which are used as the encryption nut into which you pack in the information that you want to send from me to you. So think of it like a walnut, and we're trying to calculate the shell. Once 10 minutes pass, we have the shell, we can put something in it, and now it becomes changeable or exchangeable with one another in a way that I can put anything into it. I could put a 3D, I can put a DICOM image of my shoulder x-ray into a packet and send it to somebody, and I am assured that that person receives it using the Bitcoin network. As I said, we live in a very prosperous country, and if you look at the internet traffic around the world, you can see that we're actually in the red and we're doing just fine. But the Bitcoin technology, as I said, I think is really going to be focusing mostly on the unbanked peoples of the world. And because you can basically put it into Africa and you don't really even need a computer to exchange this value, as long as you can transcribe the 64 numbers and letters that are part of your Bitcoin wallet, you can have guys like this exchanging value. So, the first guy says, hey, and did you pay me for my cow? No, hang on, let me send you the money. And he actually takes his cell phone and transfers the value for that cow to the other guy. And then the third guy says, hey, where's mine, right? So it's really like very simple to do. You don't need any equipment really to do it. And you can even do it on a piece of paper, where you could write down your Bitcoin wallet, and as long as you have that, you could transfer that set of letters and numbers to another person over a CB radio, and that other person would get it, and instantly the technology would transfer that value from that person to you. So it's kind of fascinating to me in that how it works. And if you look at the traffic that's happening on the internet at the moment, it's interesting to me that the peer-to-peer networks that are used for like music sharing and all of the things that people say they don't do, that's what they're doing. So, you can argue the fact that, people don't like what they're seeing, but they're creating this traffic. So somebody in the world is doing a lot of music sharing. And I'm sure most of your teenagers are doing that as well. So the peer-to-peer network is interesting because it's one of those networks that's also a network that is used in some ways to create Bitcoin. So this peer-to-peer network is an interesting paradigm shift in thinking, because it solves a problem of transferring a unique piece of digital property to another internet user without having a third-party intermediary, and everybody knows that it's legitimate, and everybody knows that it happened. So the Bitcoin uses this technology called the blockchain to create a general ledger in which every transaction is recorded. The only difference is from the general ledger you use in your accounting package is that the person sending and the person receiving are anonymous. So you can think of it as a new way of looking at the way we think of value. And I like this idea because it creates the opportunity to create some new kinds of things that we've never been able to do before. You can't have a dog own $1 billion today. Sorry, no dogs are in the position of owning billions of dollars. You can't have a cow or a piece of software own itself. We have always tied value to a human, to an individual. With Bitcoin, since you can set up an individual wallet that's independent of everything else, you can create some really interesting projects that some of us are working on, where you are creating code, for example, that is self-sustaining and self-evolving. So imagine like a blog, where the objective of the blog is to draw traffic in for people to exchange information, and the more people come to your blog, and the better it fares with people commenting on the conversation, the more money you make, because now you can sell advertising on your blog. So imagine a piece of code that resides across multiple servers all around the world that pays for itself in Bitcoin. It sends out pieces of code to a developer in Africa or Asia or wherever, and another piece of code to somebody in the Soviet Union, compares the two pieces of code for optimization to see which one is better suited for attracting new customers or new visitors, implements that code, and measures the efficacy of that interaction to see if I'm actually drawing more people to come to my website or less. If more people come, I need to buy more bandwidth to allocate for more space because I'm actually growing, and I charge for that, and I pay for that as a piece of code, not a human, to go pay Amazon Web Services to increase my bandwidth. And this piece of code can reside on the internet without any humans ever touching it. And it's just optimizing its own existence. And if it fails, it doesn't have enough funding, so it dies. If it's successful, it creates new iterations of itself, and it's actually growing. This is where the technology of Bitcoin really lends itself in an interesting way, because you're now able to create things in this space that were never even conceivable before. I mean, you guys know, you start a company, I need an EIN number, I set up a bank account number, I need to do all these things, I need a phone line, I need a secretary. Imagine that all this goes away, and I can create something that is self-evolving as a piece of code that pays for itself, that improves itself, and I walk away from the process completely, and I just let it live and do its thing. So that's what I mean when I say there's a kind of paradigm shift in thinking of what the Bitcoin technology lets us do. For the brainiacs in the room, when we calculate a Bitcoin block, this is what we're doing. It's a very complex math function that takes a lot of energy and effort to calculate. So you're actually being rewarded if you're mining Bitcoin, because it's a proof of work that you're creating the computations needed to create the next nut. Right now, the blockchain and the Bitcoin network is roughly at 37.5 million gigahashes per second, which is consuming approximately 0.1% of the world energy. You are maybe sitting here wondering, like, when did this happen, right? But it's growing exponentially, and because of that, rooms like this exist where all around the world, as a matter of fact, people are creating these Bitcoin miners, which are connected to the internet, and all they do is calculate these hashtags to create the nuts into which you can encapsulate value. And there is literally thousands of these around the world, hundreds of thousands, to the extent that this network is currently the fastest computer on the planet. It is 300 times faster than the top 500 supercomputers combined, and growing. So all of you may be asleep at your session thinking, how could this actually happen? But the network built on this blockchain idea that transaction is validated from one person to the next creates a new paradigm shift in which each miner, and by the way, it takes 5 mining computers to validate a transaction to make sure that it's real and legitimate. If those 5 computers are not in consensus, the transaction never happens. So it's the kind of technology that has the trust built into it using a mathematical model that defines what was a problem until 2009, which is the Byzantine general model of trust. If I give you a message to deliver to him, how do I know that the message that I asked you to deliver is the message I sent and not something else? So by having these 5 mining computers validate that trust, we're able to make sure that the transaction that you sent is actually the transaction that was received. So it kind of removes the man in the middle by creating an artificial man in the middle that's built up of people that are untrustworthy. And I'm not saying it's the perfect world in which we have everybody who trusts everybody else, but it's a social experiment in which everybody who's in the network has assurances and wants assurances that this thing will work. So it's in our best interest as a community to abide by the laws that we create inside the mathematical model to make sure that it works. Think of it like a traffic light network. If it doesn't behoove you to go through a red light because you have the potential of dying, you're not going to do it, right? So the incentive is positioned in this world in a way where if you mind them, the proof of work, the reward is greater than you trying to circumvent them. And there's a lot of mainstream media that kind of goes in the way of butting the authority of this technology because it's a little bit disruptive, as you can imagine. So what you see and hear every time that you read the paper or look in the news and they talk about pornography and I don't know what, money laundering, whatever, I think those guys are, quite frankly, too dumb to do that at the moment, and that's a strong statement. It's much easier to pack up a suitcase full of money and take it across the border, which is what a lot of people are doing. So I think in the face of butting the authority, Bitcoin is one of those things that kind of goes in the face of how we think of commerce and banking today, and that's why it threatens the banks. But most of you know that a dollar was really like an IOU that you were given because it was tied to gold at one point, and it was the receipt that you took back to the bank to get your gold because it was easier to carry. So this idea of having thousands of types of cryptocurrencies now emerging is actually a reality that's here. And it's fascinating because we have been rather stagnant in this space with money being just paper and pretty pictures and a watermark and maybe an RFID tag built into it. Now there's cryptocurrencies that are coming into existence that are deflationary, for example, in nature. And they're designed specifically with those characteristics because we want them to be traded. So if I'm doing a charity, I will give you a type of cryptocurrency coin that is worth half tomorrow and half the next day and half the day after that. And I do that intentionally because I want you to donate it to somebody where it actually does something practical and useful today and not have you wait and see. So imagine creating money or the idea of money in different ways where you can create things that actually work to benefit the objectives that you're trying to create. There's even a guy that's talking about putting micro satellites into orbit that will carry the blockchain per infinitum because the only way to really kill this technology is to shut down the internet. So if you have these mini satellites floating in space, and each one contains the entire general ledger of this blockchain for every transaction, then it's virtually unstoppable. And there's private money going into this space to do just that. People are building these things as technologies. There's even a coin that basically rewards you for exercising. So instead of mining it with computers, you can be running around and actually it tracks your movement through a Fitbit and says your proof of work is that you've moved your body physically from point A to point B so many miles, and for that we're rewarding you in these coins. By the way, this is nothing new, and I always wondered whether like Starbucks really named itself Starbucks, because they're going to have their own kind of cryptocurrency coin in the future. But it's basically an interesting idea, I think, whose time has come. And there's a lot of questions of people I talk to like, well, how do I buy one, or where do I go, or is this even legit, or is this legal, how do I do it? There's a company called Coinbase. It's actually based in San Francisco. You can go online, register, and buy $10 worth, buy $1 worth, buy whatever you want to buy. And then you can, of course, trade it or keep it. You can create a Bitcoin wallet through this company called Bitcoin Wallet that lets you name your Bitcoin to your own name. So if people want to send you money, they could just say, you know, Judy Smith at bitcoinwallet.com. And so it becomes really easy to receive payment because it's like an email address. I just don't even have to think about the cryptic numbers that make up the blockchain to make it possible. We've built a website that we're actually pretty proud of that lets you buy art for Bitcoin. The artist can upload a video of himself and what inspired him to paint it. You can photograph the art and send a picture of it to us. We'll recognize it and we'll send you back the information and the ability to buy the art right from your cell phone. So we're also innovating and creating new things in this space. This company, Exapo, for example, just came out with a new debit card that you can charge with Bitcoins. So you can go to any store, buy anything you want with it, just like a normal debit card, except that the money that it's receiving to make that purchase possible comes through Bitcoins. So I could, in effect, charge somebody's debit card up and say, here, you go buy whatever you want to buy using the same old methods that we have in place today. This website, I think, is kind of an interesting site. I sometimes turn it on just to watch what's happening. It shows different countries along the bottom here. And it shows the amount of Bitcoins that are purchased in real time by every country around the world as you sit there and eat lunch. And it kind of gives you, because the general ledger of these transactions is all public, you can watch. And just before I came here, for example, I saw a transaction flow from somewhere in the Ukraine to somewhere in London for $150 million. I don't know whose transaction it is, but I saw it went from here to there, and somebody moved that much money. And, oh, by the way, did I mention it costs $0 to move that much money from one point to another using the Bitcoin network, because it's essentially equivalent to sending an email. So now if you look at the way the world is going, you know, Bitcoin is illegal in Russia, but they seem to be using it, so who's using it, right? I mean, you kind of ask yourself, like, okay, somebody's doing this. This website, CoinDesk, is a pretty good one that gives you kind of a general overview of what's happening. And the fluctuation of the price, by the way, is very volatile because people read news and they go, oh, you know, I think it's going to go away. But it's been around for 5 years, and I don't think it's going to go away, because even though the market cap fluctuates between $7 and $12 billion in the space, you're going to see a very interesting turn of events, because there's at least 3 times that much money in circulation with technologies that are propping up those huge data centers chock full of computational devices that are generating 2 gigawatts of power. Anyway, I think I'm coming to a close here, so I need to cut it quick, but there's different ways to protect it. I just want to let you know you can also print it off into something like this if you want to take it off the blockchain, and if you feel better about holding on to it physically, because people sometimes tell me, oh, you can't hold it, it's zeros and ones, what do I do with it, how can I trust it? Well, if you like to hold things, print one of these, transfer your Bitcoin to this piece of paper, and then put that in a safety deposit box and hold on to it. That piece of paper is equivalent to whatever value you assign to it by however many Bitcoins you move to it from point A to point B. So I just want to try one more thing with all of you guys, and then I'm going to let you go. We created a really cool idea where we're going to ask you to do something today, and I'm going to let you, or I'm going to send you, I guess, $1 worth of Bitcoin for doing a little social experiment. So if you guys could take a $1 bill out of your wallet and take a picture of it, like I'm showing here on the screen, and email me that picture to bitcoin@coinfly.me, I will send you $1 worth of Bitcoin, which then you can keep, or you can forward on to, for example, a charity. So it's a really fun thing to do, and it will get you started in this new economy of Bitcoins with relative ease, because some people say, well, I don't know how to open a Bitcoin wallet. I don't know what I need to do to get started. How does this work? It's confusing. So with CoinFly, we're able to encapsulate value into an image, and I can send you a picture or ask you to send me a same picture. And once you do, the value that I assign to that is transferred to you automatically. So, and you can try it with other currencies too, and it's kind of fun. You know, if you have a $10 bill or a $20 bill, or if you think I'm going to give you $100, please try. And different things will happen. But I set this up just to show everybody here today how easy it is to do, because just by taking a picture of that dollar and sending it to bitcoin@coinfly.me, like I said, I will send every one of you $1 worth of a Bitcoin that you can then choose to do with whatever you wish. You can spend it, you can save it, you can hang on to it, you can give it to somebody else, you can forward it to your kids, whatever you want to do. So without further ado, that's kind of the gist of the quick overview. If you have any questions, please feel free to come up after and ask me, or if you want to ask them now, you're welcome.
You took my words out of my mouth, and to maintain the people's schedule, I'd appreciate if you could stay here and answer questions.
Sure.
Meanwhile, though, I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a gift.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.